All right, my young friends, if you can remember where we left off, we have been talking about relationships, energy relationships within ecosystems. Specifically, energy is transferred from the sun, at least here on the surface of the earth, to the autotrophs, the producers, plants, algae, and then from them to the first level consumers, the herbivores, from them to the second level consumers, and so on. However, energy is lost as we move up the different trophic levels, the different levels of the food chain. Energy is lost. Why is energy lost? Because organisms have to use the energy to carry out their own life processes. So once I've used the energy to do my little happy dance, that energy is lost, at least in terms of being useful to living things. One of the fundamental laws of matter and energy is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And that's true. We can't just make energy poof here, and we can't just destroy it. But it can be turned into a form that is no longer useful to us. So when I use energy to do my happy dance, the energy isn't just lost forever. It's given off by me to move my arms. Some of it's given off as heat into the surrounding atmosphere, and that is not a typically user-friendly form for a living thing. So it is lost for use by us, okay? So once energy is used by a living thing, it's really not, you can't get it back, at least not for use by another living thing. It's gone. It's gone to heat. It's gone to the universe. It's gone from us, okay? Now, matter is the other fundamental thing in the universe we need to talk about, and that works a little bit differently. Matter is not just lost or made useless to us. Quite the contrary. Not to tire out our Lego, our building block metaphor, but matter is reused just like the Legos are reused over and over by a little kid to build a tower. So please remember fundamentally that energy flows through an ecosystem in one direction only, okay? It is used from the producers to the consumers, and we only pass a little of it on to the next level. And once it's used, it's gone. And remember, I mean, it's gone. It's not useful. Gone as far as use to a living thing is concerned. It's no longer usable. Now, matter is entirely different. It is continually recycled, just like we recycle our Lego blocks over and over and over again to build fun, neat toys. So too, we reuse matter over and over again to build fun, cool, living things. Okay? So, used over and over by different organisms. The way matter, the atoms, the molecules of life, is used over and over again is through something called biogeochemical cycles. Now that seems like a big complicated word. They're also simply called nutrient cycles, so we can call it that, and that sounds a little less scary. But biogeochemical is really just saying a couple of things in the word. So bio, the nutrient, is going to spend part of its time in living things. Geo, the nutrient, is going to spend part of its time while it's in this cycle in something that's non-living, something that's part of the earth, perhaps the atmosphere, perhaps the rocks or whatever. Chemical, we're talking about chemicals, and cycles. This thing is going to go round and round and round and round in a loop, okay? The path of the nutrient, okay? So, biogeochemical cycle is simply the term for cycling matter, specifically things we call nutrients, through an ecosystem, okay? So, please again, living things do not use up matter and then make it unusable to anything that comes after them. They transform it from one form to another form, okay? For example, okay, carbon dioxide is a nutrient found in the atmosphere. Water is found in the atmosphere, also in the soil, and so on. Carbon dioxide and water get transformed. They get used to build sugar by that process we know as photosynthesis, okay? Please, again, Legos. We're going to use these little Legos here to make the big tower here, but guess what we're going to do with our big tower? We can break it down and get our little bitty Legos back and use them over and over and over again, okay? Now, something that's just kind of fun to keep this all in perspective. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Life has been using and reusing the same molecules over and over again. The same molecules are here on Earth, basically, that Earth started with. And no new molecules, except for the occasional meteorite strike or comet strike or whatever, have been added to Earth over these many, many, many years since life began. So we've been using the same stuff over and over. So the oxygen that we are breathing today may very well at one time have been part of a dinosaur millions of years ago. Some part of you right now could have been in a dinosaur millions of years ago. Certainly the things that are in you right now were part of some other living thing and not the too distant past, okay? So, pretty amazing. Just keep that on file in your mind. Now, for us, there are 4 important biogeochemical or nutrient cycles. They are the water cycle, which you probably are already familiar with, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. I want to start you off with the water cycle because I'm pretty certain that you're well versed in this. This diagram is in your handout. You can, since it's a cycle, we could start pretty much anywhere we wanted. I'll start with water that we can see on the surface of this lake, in the soil, or on the surface of the ocean. You know from earlier classes, I'm sure that you've had that, of course, this water evaporates. It will condense around actually little dust particles in the air to form clouds of water vapor that we can actually see. Excuse me. Once the droplets get large enough, they will get heavy enough to that they are brought down to Earth by gravity in the form of precipitation in liquid form. Now, when the rain falls on the Earth, it will run off into lakes. It may find porous ground and seep into the groundwater and be stored underneath the ground, and so on. If it runs off into a lake or a stream or a river, it ultimately will run off if it runs off into a stream or a river, it will ultimately run off into the ocean, and so on, and the process will repeat itself, okay? So terms you should know what it means to evaporate, for water to become vapor, liquid water to become vapor and rise to the air. Now, this diagram did not discuss transpiration, but there is one more arrow that is really important in biology. This plant, this tree, and all the little grass plants that are down here as well, take up water from the soil, but they don't just eat up the water in photosynthesis. They do use some of it in photosynthesis, but much of the water goes through the body of the plant and is released from the plant's leaves. And when plants release water through their leaves, we call that transpiration. And it can have a pretty profound effect on the water cycle. If you have a big forest, the water that is given off by those plants can have a very large impact on the weather and the way water is rained out later on, and so on. So transpiration is not a small thing. So evaporation and transpiration. Precipitation, you should know. Runoff is going to be really important for us as we especially explore human impacts on the environment. Groundwater, where water seeps into the ground, and of course it's a source of drinking water for many people, and so on. All right. As we continue to talk about nutrient cycles, let's just make sure we know what a nutrient is. It is a chemical substance that an organism needs to sustain life. So any chemical substance that any living thing needs to sustain life is called a nutrient. So that's a big, broad category. Now, primary producers, what we normally think of as plants, our autotrophs, they get their nutrients from the photosynthetic process, okay, by taking in CO2 from the air and H2O from the ground or the soil or from wherever they're getting it, and combining that to make sugar, okay? So they get nutrients by way of this process, and they also take up various minerals they need, like potassium or other minerals that are not directly linked to photosynthesis. They take up these minerals from the soil. So the soil is an important source of many nutrients for plants that are outside of the photosynthetic nutrients. Okay. Now, the way consumers get all these nutrients, the CO2, the carbon that we see here, and the minerals that we see the plants getting from soil, is the consumers eat other organisms. Primarily, somebody's going to have to eat a plant because those plants have the nutrients. Then once the plants get into the bodies of the animals, then those animals can be eaten to get those nutrients and so on. So, like water, these nutrients are passed through biogeochemical cycles, okay? The three that remain are carbon, nitrogen, and the phosphorus cycle. So these are really what we think about mostly when we think of nutrient cycles. You could argue that water is a nutrient as well, but it's usually not thought of quite in the same way. So what we're going to do is go through the carbon cycle, then we're going to take a break and hit the nitrogen cycle, which is kind of a little bit more complicated. Okay? Carbon is hugely important. It plays absolutely the central pivotal role in building all of the molecules that build your body. So without carbon, life as we know it would not exist. Now, you could argue that without a lot of different things, life as we know it could not exist. But our living biological molecules are all based on carbon. I should have said that quite that way because molecules aren't living, but the molecules that allow us to live are all fundamentally based on carbon. Carbon is the centerpiece of all these molecules. It is part of the living tissue. It makes up a large, significant part of DNA molecules that are your genetic information. Carbon is an important molecule in building DNA. It is important in building proteins. Proteins are absolutely critical in allowing your body to function, and we're going to learn all about proteins later on. But for now, suffice it to say that your muscles, all the muscles that allow you to move, are made up of protein. Many, many important things are made of protein. Carbon is central to making proteins that make up your body, okay? So, it is vital that all of life gets carbon. All of life must have DNA that we know of. Well, some use RNA, but most life, DNA or RNA, both of them require carbon. Proteins, all living things must get carbon to make those chemicals. So we've got to move carbon from the environment where there's lots of carbon in the form of carbon dioxide or whatever. We've got to get that into living things and yet be able to reuse it over and over again like the little kid with the Lego blocks, okay? So, biological processes that move carbon through its cycle as a nutrient are things like photosynthesis, cellular respiration, let me write cellular, and decomposition. And we'll talk about the role that those processes play shortly. But we've already talked about photosynthesis and respiration in class. Decomposition is when things break down and return to the earth. We'll talk about that. The geochemical processes that can move carbon through the cycle, that can get carbon, that release carbon into the atmosphere from the earth. Volcanic eruptions do that. There are some processes that are kind of both biological and geological. When dead things decompose and the pressure of the earth over millions of years presses those dead organisms together, we get what are called fossil fuels, like, like oil and coal, okay? Natural gas. All of those things are fuels that are made from the bodies of dead things that get pressurized in the earth over millions of years. And when we burn them, we release them, the carbon from that, back into the atmosphere. So burning fossil fuels releases carbon into the atmosphere. So let's take a look at this carbon cycle. You've got this diagram on the back of your handout, I believe. Essentially, to simplify it out, let's ignore this. This is, I don't know what that's about. You don't need that. Okay. So we've got this huge storehouse of CO2, atmospheric carbon dioxide, in the air all around us. We're walking around in it all the time. There's a bunch of it, and we're exhaling it all the time. Okay. So there's lots of CO2. Now, this carbon here is absolutely critical that we get it into our bodies to build DNA, to build protein, and all the other things that we need to create to make our bodies and to allow us to live. Now, there's CO2 all around me. I can breathe it in, but I'm going to exhale it right back out again. It's not going to do me any good in that form. I can't take it in. I mean, I can take it into my body, but it doesn't stay there when I breathe it. I have to take it in some other way. And I really can't without the help of another organism. Okay? Plants are going to be the things that take in the CO2 for us and for themselves as well. Assimilation of CO2, meaning the CO2 is going to be made part of the plant by way of the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so photosynthesis is critical to the carbon cycle. The CO2 is taken in by the plants. The plants, of course, also take in water, and they do their photosynthetic thing with it. Okay, now, the animals, as we see this deer here, will eat the plants, okay? When they eat the plants, they use the sugar that the plant made. So the deer takes in the sugar from this photosynthesis, burns it, and releases CO2 back into the atmosphere through cellular respiration. This is animal cellular respiration, where we are going to release the CO2 back into the atmosphere, okay, as we learned about in class. So photosynthesis takes in CO2, cell respiration is the exact opposite. It releases CO2, okay? Now, we also know that animals leave waste on the ground, okay? And plants lose leaves and things and leave waste on the ground and so on. Decomposition of animal waste and leaf litter and things like that by bacteria and fungus also returns CO2 to the atmosphere. Decomposition, breaking down of this old, the poo, for the technical term there, and the leaf litter and so on, breaking down this living matter is going to release that carbon. Breaking down the sugar is going to release the CO2 back into the atmosphere. Even the plants do respiration. Remember, you can go to the fridge and build a sandwich, build your sugar molecule, but it doesn't do you any good unless you eat it. You break it down and get the energy out. So the plants have to do that as well. So they do plant cellular respiration. It's the same process. It's just done in a plant, and then they release CO2 in the air. So the carbon that we so desperately need, the plant needs it, we need it to build DNA and protein, is taken from the atmosphere by the plants, given to the animals, and then returned to the atmosphere by animals and plants, and by the decomposition of waste products. Okay? Now, again, this isn't the only way. This is the most fundamental way to think of the carbon cycle. There are other ways CO2 is put into the atmosphere. This right here, let me get rid of my This right here is a picture of the Dominion power plant at Dutch Gap, which is off Route 10, not too far from us, just probably about a 20-minute drive. And what you see here is just a coal mountain. If you drive by the Dutch Gap power plant, there's just mountains of coal. And this coal is the fossilized remains of plants that were pressed under the earth, dead plants that were pressurized under the earth over millions of years and then dug up. And now the coal-fired power plant burns that coal and creates energy for us. Coal is a wonderful source of energy, and we have tons of it in the United States. It's often said that we are the Saudi Arabia of coal, and we can get it. We aren't dependent on anyone else for it. It's a good energy source. Of course, the drawbacks are that when you burn fossil fuels, you do release CO2 into the atmosphere, and we burn so much of this stuff that we do release a lot of extra CO2, more than the plants can use and take up and so on, and it does build up in the atmosphere. And there's significant data that suggests that this is causing some problems with our environment, which we will address later on. But it no doubt is one of our safest ways to get energy in the United States and easiest. We burn oil and release CO2 and gasoline and so on from our car exhaust. So CO2 is going to the atmosphere from our car exhaust. And of course, anytime you burn any living thing, like this forest fire, you are releasing CO2 into the air. Why? Because this plant is made of carbon, just like you are. And when you burn that stuff, you burn the sugar, you burn the thing, you release those chemicals from their chemical bonds and return that CO2 back into the atmosphere. Okay? So that's the carbon cycle. I'm going to stop there, take a break, and then we're going to tackle our next biogeochemical cycle, the nitrogen cycle. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next podcast.